In the early 20th century, the meatpacking industry was significantly distorted in the public image. With the development of a national railroad system with refrigerated cars, meat and livestock could be easily transported across America in vast quantities. Four main companies gained control over the industry: Armour, Swift, Cargill, and Purdue. Conditions for workers and supplies grew worse and worse, and the public was none the wiser. Upton Sinclair's novel, The Jungle, sought to uncover the horrifying conditions within the industry walls and to gain sympathy for the slaughterhouse workers. While his story may have been dramatized, it opened the eyes of the public and political leaders to what went on under their noses and onto their plates. Even with the attention of the public and the president, Sinclair was disappointed with the reaction to his novel, yet it still went on to greatly impact our society.
Born September 20th, 1878, to a broken South aristocracy, Sinclair had a wealthy mother and a drunkard for a father. "As far back as I can remember," he said, "my life was a series of Cinderella transformations. One night I'd be sleeping on a vermin-ridden sofa in a lodging house, and the next night under silken coverlets in a fashionable home. It all depended on whether my father had money for the week's board." Sinclair wrote feverishly during his life, starting his career at age 15, writing dime novels to pay for his education, majoring in writing at the City College of New York. Street and Smith, his publisher, put many of his works into 5-cent weeklies, like True Blue, an Army and Navy weekly, with him going under many pseudonyms like that of Frederick Garrison and Clark Fitch. In 1904, because of his extensive experience, he was approached by a socialist newspaper, Appeal to Reason, requesting that he write a story.
The original purpose of the novel Sinclair planned to write was to describe the horrible conditions for slaughterhouse workers, and many passages detail these conditions gruesomely. There are descriptions of men losing their fingers to blades, disfiguring their hands, crippling their backs, contracting diseases like tuberculosis, and even falling into steaming lard vats, their bones fished out days later. On November 2nd, 1904, at age 26, Sinclair set off for Chicago with a $500 advance, an idea that would change America.
Years later, Ernest Poole would write about his arrival, saying, "In breezed the lad in a wide-brimmed hat, with a loose-flowing tie and a wonderful, warm, expansive smile. 'Hello, I'm Upton Sinclair,' he said, 'and I've come to write the Uncle Tom's Cabin of the labor movement.'" Sinclair had chosen Chicago as the setting for his story to broaden appeal for his novels and to call to his readers' self-interest. During the 7 weeks he spent there, he toured factories with an English medical writer, Adolph Smith, and gathered data. However, he only really found a direction for his story by watching a Lithuanian wedding, where he got most of the inspiration for his characters, an immigrant family that arrives in Chicago during the labor movement and falls on hard times.
His final product, The Jungle, had the original intent to describe the plight of the slaughterhouse workers and to gain the sympathy of the public for their cause. Previously, the public had been in support of the big businesses that ran the meat industry, considering them helpful for improving American technology and a boon to consumers. Although they did help push America into the Industrial Revolution, there was no change to the way they treated their workers or the way the food was handled. The novel was originally published as a series of newspaper articles in Appeal to Reason, 1 chapter per issue. He wrote it as a fictitious story so that he could include urban legends and better get his point across. The immediate reaction of the newspaper's readers was huge, and Sinclair began searching for a company to publish his work as a novel. After 2 years and rejections by several publishers, one calling it gloom and horror unrelieved. As to the possibilities of a large sale, I should think them not very good. Doubleday took a chance and published the book. However, it was under the condition that Sinclair removed some of his more vivid descriptions, claiming it was uncomfortably realistic. The book, despite the predictions of other publishers, was an immediate success. 5,500 copies were sold in a single day, and the public quickly learned of the book and recalled at its words.
The outcry of the public was massive, as Sinclair had hoped, but he soon realized that their shock and horror was directed at something else entirely: their food. Sinclair described appalling conditions for the products the workers turned out, not just the workers themselves. He had written about mislabeled products, diseased, rotten, and contaminated meat, the processing of dead or injured animals when the workers were unsupervised, and many products being doused in chemicals before making their way onto store shelves. As he wrote in The Jungle, things that were quite unspeakable went on there in the packing houses all the time, and they were taken for granted by everybody, only they did not show. And his words utterly disgusted and disturbed the public. Domestic meat consumption took a sharp decline, and the nation was in turmoil over these 350 pages. Sinclair was truly disappointed with the public's reaction, as they had ignored the predicament of the workers, and he later commented on this occurrence, stating, "I aimed at the public's heart, and by accident I hit it in the stomach."
I would say only about a dozen pages of the novel is spent on the preparation of food and the condition of the food that's being produced by these meatpacking companies. But those are the pages, of course, that had a huge impact because Americans were shocked and almost disbelieving in what went into the food that they were putting on their tables every day.
The book was very successful, giving Sinclair thousands of dollars in which he used to buy a mansion and start a socialist colony called the Helicon Home Colony. It was to be a farm community that was self-sufficient, with everyone sharing all of the space it had, and no one person owning any portion of the mansion. Sadly, almost as soon as it had been constructed, it burned down, and Sinclair, having spent almost all of his money on it, was broke.
President Theodore Roosevelt even read Sinclair's novel, and he too was affected by its descriptions. As a member of the Rough Riders in the Spanish-American War, Roosevelt had seen firsthand the atrocities Sinclair was describing in the jungle. His fellow soldiers had fallen ill and died because of the rotten and spoiled meat. Previously, Roosevelt had strongly opposed Sinclair's type of journalism, also known as yellow journalism. Yellow journalism was known for its outlandish stories, mostly based on speculation and fiction. But it was also a time where journalists tried to expose corruption in government and the unending privileges of the upper class. Roosevelt had originally called him a crackpot, but after Sinclair had personally sent him a copy of the book, he read it and was appalled by the things written there. He sent 2 independent investigators out to see if what Sinclair had written was indeed true. After the investigators came back confirming everything Sinclair has written as truth, he wrote to Sinclair, inviting him to the White House. In the letters the two exchanged, it is evident that Roosevelt wanted nothing to do with Sinclair's message about the conditions for workers, but also that he was willing to solve the food quality issues Sinclair had addressed.
After his investigation of the slaughterhouses, Roosevelt signed the Pure Food and Drug Act in June 1906, also known as the Weeeeee Act, which prohibited the marketing of adulterated food and drugs. The products included in this category were ones that had reduced quality or strength, concealed damage or inferiority, included additives that were injurious to health, or were filthy, decomposed, or putrid. The act also banned the mislabeling of food and drugs. The investigation of the misbranding of adulterated food or drugs was up to Wiley's USDA Bureau of Chemistry. Soon, the decisions by the Bureau were checked by judges, the Board of Food and Drug Inspection, and the Referee Board of Consulting Scientific Experts. Court decisions soon narrowly defined the wording in the Pure Food and Drug Act, causing the Bureau of Chemistry to reorganize. In 1927, the Food, Drug, and Insecticide Organization was created, and 3 years later, it became the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA. In 1967, the Wholesome Meat Act was signed to fix the loopholes in the Pure Food and Drug Act.
The jungle also had a huge impact on the way news was reported. In the early 1900s, the big businesses and political leaders were in complete control over the newspapers, bearing stories that would make them look bad in the eyes of the public. It was a little before The Jungle was published that journalists were able to get through to the public and get their stories published. Before, a single story might get out, and the corporations would write it off as paranoia or fiction. Journalists like Sinclair were given the name muckrakers, people who tried to reveal corruption within government industries that had been previously covered up. This type of journalism saw massive growth, thanks to Sinclair and his fellow muckrakers, and allowed newspapers and magazines to domineer mass media. Journalists went after stories that had to do with uncovering the dark side of society, having been inspired by Upton Sinclair. Without the efforts of the muckrakers, newspapers and magazines and other news outlets might not have the same ability to report the truth today and would not wield the same power over the media. Upton Sinclair's The Jungle changed the way America looked at the meatpacking industry. He opened the eyes of the 20th century public to the awful conditions within the walls of the slaughterhouses, and his novel even reached the president, Theodore Roosevelt, who signed the Pure Food and Drug Act as a result. Even without the approval of its author, The Jungle drastically affected journalism and the meatpacking industry, and was a national bestseller and wild success, translated into 17 languages and 7 editions worldwide. Upton Sinclair may have been dissatisfied for the reasons for his novel's success, but the power of his own words would reach far beyond his disapproval and his death in 1968. Little did he know that they would change our nation forever.